History remembers the headlines. We find the bylines. This is the unsung. When we think of Holocaust rescuers, certain names immediately come to mind. Oskar Schindler, the German industrialist. Raoul Wallenberg, the Swedish diplomat. Their stories are powerful, essential parts of history. But what if I told you there was another name that should be just as famous? A name belonging to a woman who saved more than twice as many people as Schindler? Her name was Irena Sendler. She was a Polish social worker, and she orchestrated the rescue of 2,500 Jewish children from the hell of the Warsaw Ghetto. For decades after the war, her story was buried. First, by a communist Polish government that suppressed stories of individual heroism. Then, by a historical narrative that seemed to prefer simpler, more cinematic saviors. So how did a woman who saved thousands of lives become a footnote in the very history she helped to write? How did one of the most courageous acts of the 20th century almost disappear from our collective memory? This is the story of Irena Sendler, and why we almost never heard it. To understand her, you have to go back to her childhood. Irena was born in 1910 in Otwock, a town near Warsaw. Her father was a physician, and many of his patients were poor Jews whom other doctors refused to treat. This compassion came at a cost. When Irena was just 7 years old, her father contracted typhus from his patients and died. But before he passed, he left her with a guiding principle, a moral compass that would define the rest of her life. He told her, if you see someone drowning, you must jump in to save them, even if you cannot swim. That lesson became her life's creed. As a young woman, she became a social worker for Warsaw's social welfare department. She was fiercely opposed to the anti-Semitism she saw growing around her. When the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939 and established the Warsaw Ghetto a year later, Irena was in a unique position. The ghetto was an officially sealed-off area, a prison of starvation and disease for nearly 500,000 Jews, but as a municipal social worker tasked with preventing the spread of contagious diseases, Irena had a pass. She had official access. Her cover story was inspecting for typhus, a very real and deadly threat inside the ghetto walls. But her real mission was one of defiance. Under the watchful eyes of Nazi guards, she began smuggling in life-saving supplies, food, clean water, and medicine. She was risking her life with every trip. But soon she realized that smuggling supplies wasn't enough. The Nazis were beginning the final solution. The deportations to the Treblinka death camp had started. Children were being orphaned, starving in the streets. Irena knew she had to do more. She had to smuggle the children out. This is where Irena Sendler's work becomes truly extraordinary. It wasn't just about individual acts of bravery. It was about building a system. Her pivotal contribution was not just rescue, but the systematic preservation of identity. She understood that saving a life was only half the battle. Saving a child's history, their name, their very soul was just as crucial. First, she built a network. Codenamed Jolanta, she recruited about 24 trusted colleagues, mostly women. They were social workers, nurses, and nuns from local convents. This clandestine group became her army of helpers, acting as couriers, forging documents, and securing safe houses for the children they smuggled out. It was a conspiracy of compassion, operating right under the noses of the Gestapo. Their methods were as ingenious as they were terrifyingly risky. Every rescue was a life-or-death gamble. Tiny infants were sedated with a drop of phenobarbital to keep them from crying at the wrong moment. They were then hidden in the most unlikely of places: a mechanic's toolbox, a sack of potatoes, a large suitcase, even a coffin. Some children were whisked away in ambulances, hidden under stretchers carrying typhus patients, a disease the Nazi guards feared. Others were guided through the city's labyrinthine sewer tunnels, navigating filth and darkness to emerge on the Aryan side of the city. A particularly daring route was through the old courthouse that straddled the ghetto and the rest of Warsaw. Children would enter on one side and exit as different people on the other. But the most remarkable part of Irena's operation was what happened after the escape. For every child she saved, she created a new non-Jewish identity, a new name, a new birth certificate. But she knew that these false identities were a temporary shield. One day the war would end. And she believed with every fiber of her being that these children, and any surviving family, would need to know who they truly were. So, she kept a secret record. On tiny scraps of tissue paper, she meticulously wrote down each child's real name and their new, adopted one, along with the location of their new family. She sealed these precious lists inside glass jars. And then, she buried the jars under an apple tree in a friend's garden. It was a profound act of faith, a belief that there would be an after, that these identities mattered, that the children would survive, and that one day, they would want to know where they came from. From the summer of 1942 until the ghetto's final brutal liquidation in the spring of 1943, Irena's network rescued an average of several children every single day. The final tally is estimated to be around 2,500 children saved from certain death. So why, with a story this incredible, did Irena Sendler become a historical footnote? Her erasure from popular history was the product of a toxic combination of political silencing and simple narrative neglect. After the war, Poland fell under the control of a Soviet-backed communist regime. This government had a very specific way it wanted the war to be remembered. It promoted narratives of collective resistance, of the heroic Red Army and Polish communist partisans. The story of a single, non-communist social worker, tied to the Polish Home Army, the government in exile's resistance movement, was politically inconvenient. It didn't fit their script. In 1949, Sendler was arrested and brutally tortured by the secret police. Her heroism was not celebrated. It was punished and suppressed. There was also a more subtle but equally powerful force at play: gender bias. The popular narratives of the Holocaust often gravitated toward male saviors, particularly those in positions of formal power. Oskar Schindler was an industrialist, a factory owner. Raoul Wallenberg was a diplomat. They were men who used their status and influence. Irena Sendler was a woman and a social worker. In the eyes of many traditional historians, she was seen as a helper, not a leader. Her work, rooted in care and nurturing, was less visible, less dramatic in the classical sense, than that of her male counterparts. Then came Hollywood. Steven Spielberg's 1993 masterpiece, Schindler's List, rightfully cemented Oskar Schindler in the global consciousness. The film provided a powerful, accessible archetype of the rescuer, a flawed but charismatic man who undergoes a profound moral transformation. Irena's story was different. It was more complex, less centralized. It was the story of a network, a community of quiet courage led by a woman who was never motivated by profit or status, but by a simple, unwavering moral code. Her story just didn't fit the mold that popular culture had created. For nearly 60 years, her story remained buried, known only to a small circle in Poland. And then, in 1999, something amazing happened. Thousands of miles away, in rural Kansas, a group of high school students were looking for a topic for a National History Day project. They stumbled upon a short news clipping that mentioned an Irena Sendler who had saved thousands of children. They were stunned. They thought it must be a typo. Surely, if someone had done this, they would have heard of her. Their research led them down a rabbit hole, and they slowly pieced together her forgotten story. They wrote a play about her, which they titled Life in a Jar. That play, born from a school project, went viral. It was performed hundreds of times across the United States and eventually, the world. It brought Irena Sendler, then in her 90s and living in a Warsaw nursing home, to international attention. A group of teenagers with a history project corrected a 6-decade oversight of history. Irena Sendler was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. She passed away in 2008, at the age of 98, finally recognized for her incredible courage. Her legacy is twofold. First, she is a profound model of moral courage, not born from grand ideology, but from everyday empathy and a simple lesson from her father: when you see someone drowning, you must try to save them. Second, her story is a powerful case study in how history is written, and how easily it can forget its bravest actors when they don't fit the preferred narrative. Those jars she buried weren't just archives of names. They were an act of radical hope. A stubborn belief that even in the darkest of times, identity matters, family matters, and the future is worth fighting for. Irena's story was almost lost. It makes you wonder who else is out there. Who are the other women rescuers, the other quiet resistors, whose stories still remain in the shadows? If you know of any, share their names in the comments below. Let's make sure no hero goes unsung. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to The Unsung for more stories from the bylines of history.